Hello and welcome to High Caliber TV, your source for figure and model updates every Wednesday and Friday. Today on Figure Friday I'm going to be showing off the first part in a several part series of videos where I detail and talk about different tank crews, and the first two pairs of tank crews are the early war Panzer crew and the late war Waffen-SS tank crew. The main difference between these two pairs are the uniforms. The late war figures are dressed in a really snazzy looking rubberized uniform. This accounts for the semi-gloss sheen on the figures. The reasoning behind rubberizing your uniforms was just so that rain, oil, gas would flow off of the uniform so that people didn't have to walk around with flammable liquids on themselves. And the early war figures are dressed in a really basic drab gray color. Very, very early war German. The troops wore German field gray while the tankers wore gray uniforms. One of the really fantastic things about Alpine miniatures is that you can tell what unit the figures are intended to be from. Obviously, if you have a vehicle that didn't belong to those units, you can always scrape away the detail, remodel it if you're into that. But for me, it's just fantastic. Both pairs of figures have the insignia of the Death's Head division somewhere on their uniform. The early war guys have it on their lapels and the hats, while the late war guys just have it on their caps as the cap brass. And the Death's Head, if you know your history, goes back to the Prussian Hussar units. They wore the Death's Head and they were all dressed in black, so hence you have the dark gray, dark black uniforms that the German tank crews wore. Another great thing that ties them into hangovers from cavalry units, which all vehicle crews and I suppose in a way air crews were, just sort of future iterations of cavalry once cavalry was phased out. The scarves that they're wearing are really sort of, dandy, not necessarily functional scarves. They could have been if they covered their faces while they were in the desert or just on a really dusty road, but a lot of times you see them dressed very fancily with their scarves, and these scarves would have been riding scarves that horsemen would have worn. And the early war tank crew both are wearing riding gloves, which are really tight-fitting, dressy looking gloves. So that's one of the really cool details. The SS bands, the two S's, are visible on the lapels of the late war tank crews, which is really cool. I always love when I see things like that because it means that you get to flesh out the little details on the figures a little bit more. And I've mentioned this in a lot of other previous videos, but when you have a figure that has a very monochromatic uniform, it always helps to have little touches of silver, and in both cases there are small bands of burgundy, sort of a brick red color on the caps and always on the shoulder bars of these tankers, which really help to break up the monotony of the uniforms. The late war officer has an Iron Cross visible, so these guys are combat veterans. Something that I found, what initially really attracted me to Alpine miniatures was the fact that the figures tell a story without having any need for anything else. They could just be standing on their own, and if you look and go in and look at them with a perceptive open mind, you can tell that the sculptor had something in mind for them. And the main difference between these two pairs, why I chose them today, was that the early war tank crew, if you look at the way that they're posed, they're intended to be posed together. Of course, they can be taken separately, but there's the NCO looking over his officer's shoulder, sort of like, oh, what are you pointing at, kind of a look, which is really eager, sort of go-get-'em, propaganda almost look that can be indicative of early war when people weren't as tired of fighting. Whereas the late war crew, they look, I'd say arrogant is a really good way to put it, sort of tired, and they have really unimpressed looks on their faces, like, you know, they're done campaigning and they really just sort of want to go home. But what I really want to talk about is the late war figure, the guy holding a cigarette in his left hand. I've personally built him in the past and painted him up, and I just love this figure. The number one detail that I want to point out that a lot of people seem to miss is that he's actually wearing a wedding band on his left hand. That's amazing. That's so cool that the sculptor was able to pick out such a tiny detail, and that fleshes out his story even more, if you think about it. So I thought that was really cool, and yeah, just a fantastic pair of figures, both of them. If you're into Panzer Is, Panzer IIIs, things like that for early war or late war, hunting tigers, king tigers, panthers, blah 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 blah, these crews are what you're looking for. So for these figures and many, many more, please check us out at highcaliberminiatures.com. I'm going to put the link in the description below, as always. Follow us on Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter for daily updates on what Alan and I are working on and stock updates. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.